Oh, welcome back. Great timing. I was just wrapping up this environment painting, so I'm gonna be able to show you exactly how I did it. And you're gonna paint along with me if you want. I'll show you every step, and you should be able to do this in pretty much any painting software. So by the end of this class, you should have a brand new, awesome painting to add to your portfolio. Now let's get started. All right, so just like with any drawing, the first step will be super rough. Our goal here will be to block in our scene. So we'll start from the back with the sky. That's going to be our background, and we'll add clouds later, but for now, let's just fill the background layer with a deep blue color. And you can color pick what I'm doing if you want, or just feel free to select your own blue. But yeah, we just want a sky to get started. Oh, and also let's not forget to lighten the blue as we get closer to the horizon line. The sky always looks a little brighter the closer it gets to the ground. Now let's actually place that horizon line around here. And I just usually avoid placing it down the center because that tends to look very static and boring. When it's lower on the canvas like mine is here, that tends to create more of an emphasis on the sky or like the height of things. And it makes us as the viewer feel smaller, closer to the ground, and it's not as boring. So anyways, now that I have some grass in here on a new layer, we'll call this the middle ground, by the way. Since it's meant to be further back in the scene, I made sure to select colors that are mixed with a lot of bluish white, compared to the foreground, where all the colors will be a lot more vibrant and saturated, because the effect of atmospheric perspective isn't as visible when things are up close. So yeah, always keep that in mind. Atmospheric perspective adds a layer of white or like light blue fog over everything. More so the further away it is in the scene. Now, so far, there's not a whole lot for our gaze to latch onto, so let's add a trail to lead the eye into the painting. Just quickly blocking it in here, where it's like wider closest to the camera and thinner as you get further back, just to keep in mind perspective. Things that are further back appear smaller. But yeah, here I have kind of this big S shape kind of. And with this, it's going to be a lot easier to kind of build stuff around it. Now we have a direction, literally. And before we start dressing this up, let's add another layer on top of it all to get some shadows in there. So I'll set this to multiply. And for the shadow color, I'll get something close to the color of the sky, but a little warmer maybe, so more like a light violet. And you can see this makes for some pretty nice contrasting shadows already. Now this is just a scribble, but we'll refine this later. So for now, let's hide the shadows and start adding vegetation to this barren world. So with the shadows hidden, you'll have to use your imagination a little bit because they won't look all that great until we make them visible again. But I always prefer to start with the bigger, most impactful items like the trees in the foreground. So let's see how I create one. And by the way, all the brushes that I'm using today are either part of my free brush set or my advanced painter set, for which you can find links in the video description. So now there are many different types of trees that we could do, but let's go with this one here that kind of caught my eye as I was browsing on the interwebs, a type of madrone tree from California. Now I think the red bark should contrast like pretty nicely with all the greens that we're gonna end up having here. And this should be relatively easy to draw for a tree. It's just a bunch of long sticks, really, like with a few smaller branches forking out here and there. The structure overall seems pretty simple. So those trees won't be going everywhere. I'm actually going to place them specifically right at the edge of the foreground, right before we transition into the middle ground. And don't worry about the bottom of the trunk here. Just leave that pretty sketchy. It doesn't really matter because we'll hide that with bushes in just a minute. And as I'm painting those reddish branches against the really saturated blue, it's got a pretty interesting contrast going on here. It makes it hard to look at. So let's add some green in here. It's badly needed. Now I have this brush here that I made a while back that I think works fantastic for this kind of stuff. It's in my free pack actually, and it's called the MB Bush. We'll draw on two separate layers here for the leaf. So there's going to be one layer behind the branches that we've painted already, and then another one on top to get some depth in here. So the branches are basically sandwiched in between. So I like to start with the layer behind. I'll get a darker shade of green, like darker than the grass, as tree leaves usually are. And then we can just dab a few spots here to get something going. But it's really that other layer that matters the most though, the one on top of the branches here, where we're going to bring in a lot more light and a lot more volume to the tree overall. So I'm basically doing the same thing, just a couple of brush strokes here, and then quickly we get a lot of foliage, but we can also start to smudge a little bit the edges here and there to make them feel like maybe the wind is blowing a little bit, just so that it doesn't look like the shape has been stamped on everywhere. A little bit of smudging action really helps here. And this brush is actually pretty nice because it adds different variation of my base colors. so it looks a little bit more natural, right? Well, check this out. But yeah, now with a slightly darker green, let's add a few more brush strokes to make it seem like there's some shadows in here. I'm using this brush right here, which is a brush that I'll be using a lot throughout the whole process. It's got this really nice organic feel to it, which works perfect for like this type of vegetation painting. And also I added a bunch of black spots all over the branches for the fallen branches, basically, like, you know, the ref had as well. So all my trees are starting to look pretty good, but they definitely also really badly need some shadows, because that's going to make a big difference. So let's bring back that shadow layer that we created at the beginning, and now, well, where would those shadows be on the trees? All right, surely we'll have some directly below the leaves, you know, casting shadow. And basically the shadow layer here is a cast shadow layer specifically. So we would have maybe some shadows at the base of the tree, and maybe some of the trees in the back don't get, you know, light at all. I'm kind of going for this vibe right here, like this reference, where there's a little bit of light coming through the leaves, and all of those trees will also be casting shadows on the ground as well, of course. Now, it's starting to look better, right? But we're still missing a lot. So before we work on the ground, let's finish up the trees in the background this time, or I should say in the middle ground. Like we did for the grass, we'll want to use similar colors that we've used in the foreground, but much more desaturated. So I'm still using the same brush here, and we'll just lay down the foundation again using a darker color. And then I'll use a lighter color for the sunlight, which we'll have coming from this side, kind of. And when drawing trees or drawing foliage like this, we're drawing a 3D volume, right? So we're really just drawing like big spheres with the light on one side and the shadows on the other. But it's the extra brush strokes that will really kind of break this up and make it look more organic. But we always still gotta think of the light. At least though, we won't need as much detail for stuff that's in the background. Because it's in the background, it's in the far distance, just like you can't really see details, you know, when it's super far away. We're gonna basically do the same thing here and save ourselves some time. Keep the details at a minimum for everything that's in the background, or middle ground rather. All right, now the ground still looks pretty bad, like we really have no grass texture so far, but that's fine because we're saving this for last. And it'll all make sense when we get there. So maybe now let's add a couple of quick rocks to add variety to our environment. Like real simple, just a couple of quick brush strokes. And like what I'm thinking about when I paint rocks, really, at least in this particular case, is I find like drawing bad boxes works super well. So basically think of a box when drawing it, but just don't make it quite square, right? Some of them are rotated, some are cut in half, and that usually looks pretty convincing without having to use references. Of course, as long as the lighting makes sense, so we know, just like the trees in the background, that we have a light source coming from that direction-ish, so we won't have that, you know, that side of the rocks facing the light source most directly to be the brightest of all sides. And with the rocks, but also with everything else that I keep adding to my scene, every time we add something new, I'll always want to go back to my shadow layer, my cast shadow layer, and adjust the shadows in consequence. Now in my scene here, there's something that I haven't really quite explained, but I'm imagining that there are trees like behind us as well, not just in front of us. And those trees that are off camera really would be the ones that are casting the shadows that you can see here at the bottom of the painting. So anyways, just gotta adjust the shadows for those new rocks that I've added in here. And now let's actually work on hiding the bottom of the trees with more vegetation. So we could draw like roots and stuff like that, but I feel like in nature, you rarely see the roots of trees unless they're massive. Usually, you know, everything's going to be kind of overgrown. We're going to have like small, big shrubs, tall blades of grass, all that kind of stuff usually tends to hide at the bottom of the tree. So we're going to be doing exactly the same thing here. So using essentially the same method that I used for the tree foliage, we can add some lower shrubs all around those trees. And again, I'm adding a layer behind the trees and one in front. Make sure we get that nice depth in there. And once again, a new element has been added, so we gotta go back to that shadow layer and make some adjustments. And I think it's pretty obvious, but just in case, you know, like I'm leaving a couple of bright spots for the sunlight that comes through the gaps in the tree canopy. And now we're ready to wrap things up and work on the grass, especially in the foreground where we haven't spent much time yet. And everything I've been doing so far has been going a little fast, of course, like I'm glossing over a lot of stuff since this is just a quick YouTube video. But if you would prefer a much slower pace, you know, where I don't skip any details, where I go in deep in environment design, brush creation, all that kind of stuff, and a ton more actually. You should check out my complete art education program with the link in the video description below. I don't take any sponsors, so this is it. You know, I don't want to take too much of your time since you can learn all about it by checking the website, but we just reached past 29,000 students enrolled in a full program. So to celebrate, you'll be able to get a fat discount for a couple more days. So check down below to know exactly when the sale ends, and maybe, just maybe, join the most popular art education program in the entire world. We get a pretty cool private Discord community as well. All right, now let's get back to playing gods and finish this cozy environment we got going on here. So we have much of the main ingredients so far, but our ground still looks terrible. We're still gonna need to add a lot more details to the foreground to really give the scene a sense of depth, because we want low details in the background, medium details in the middle ground, and maximum details for the foreground. So I've shaded the ground as if everything was flat, but of course it's not, right? So it's going to be full of small plants, tall grass. So with a layer on top of my shadows this time, I'll start painting in some blades of grass. This is just another brush that I have in my advanced brush set. It works super well for that kind of stuff. It's good to add a bit of texture everywhere, but I'll pay the most attention to the transitions between the lights and the shadows, since those areas of high contrast will always stand out more than the rest. So you don't actually need to add too much grass texture if those transitions are done well. And like, see how it feels like their grass has a lot more volume now? And we can use the same brush to get us better transitions between the rocks and the grass also, and the bushes too. I think this kind of stuff helps make everything feel a lot more grounded in the scene, like nothing is floating anymore. All right, this feels a lot more alive now, but the path could still use a little bit of texture. You know, if we imagine this is some sort of like a dirt road, basically just some horizontal brush strokes to help break up like how flat it was. And then in nature, usually we'll find some little flowers maybe. So I don't want anything to stand out too much. So like white and yellow flowers usually work pretty well. So let's add some everywhere in the scene. So in the foreground, of course, they're going to be a little bigger, a little bit more detailed. And then for the background, just basically a bunch of small dots. I think we got ourselves a nice little painting here. And maybe let's check out what this could look like with the alternative middle grounds layers. Just the ocean, or maybe the little river. This really makes it look completely different. Oh, and before we wrap this up, actually, I forgot to paint in some clouds, so let's do that real quick. The way I do clouds is gonna be very simple. I have a very handy cloud brush, also part of my advanced brush set, of course. So we're just going to start with a darker tone for the shadows of the clouds, right? Clouds are 3D volumes. And then of course, keeping the light direction in mind once again, we can now bring in the lighter color, the off-white. And in this particular case, we really don't need to do a whole lot more to the clouds because they're all gonna be hidden behind the trees, right? For the most part. We just needed a little something to let us know that it's there. Here's the final result. What do you think? So yeah, hopefully some of you are gonna give this a shot, and if you do, definitely tag me on social media. You'll find all my accounts in the description below if you're not following me yet. But yeah, I would love to see what kind of results you're getting out of this. And just to be clear, like for this specific painting, for this tutorial, feel free to copy everything and post it as your own. I really don't care. Credits would be nice, but you don't have to. I just hope it helps. Let me know in the comments. But now some of you might be wondering like how you would go about like painting or drawing a scene like this if there were some man-made structures where perspective is required. And if that's you, don't you worry. I got a perfect class for you, going over everything you would possibly need to know to draw basic perspective. So while you wait for next week's class, click the thumbnail to the perspective class that's going to be up on screen in a second, and I'll see you there.